I would have really sadly shortchanged myself in every single area of my life. The great paradox, the beauty is that when I quit trying to engineer, when I quit trying to manipulate the patterns, when I start trying real hard to pull back to the simplicity of I'm going to do the next right thing, God, and trust that you'll make my life and will what you would have it be. I can't figure this out. I'm tired of being a chimpanzee trying to master quantum physics. When I'll do that, what my God has got in store for me is always just infinitely more beautiful than anything I'm capable of conjuring up. I can't even imagine what my God's got in store for me when I'll let go, when I'll try to do my God's will, when I'll try to make myself useful with that next thing. Just let God lead me from there. In that 8.5 years, I wasn't back in Louisville 30 days before I started dating Sharon, and some of you folks have met Sharon. Sharon's not in the program. She's a school teacher, and her 30-year-old and my 30-year-old were classmates, and I'd always really admired Sharon, and I'd had 1 or 2 dates with her and not followed up in 5 years before that, and I called Sharon. Didn't know why, and I wasn't trying to fix anything. I didn't have a pattern. I didn't have a plan. The only manipulation I did was I used that 11th step trick on her, and that'll work on anybody in any human situation. If I'll remember to pray, Lord, please let me seek to love, comfort, and understand rather than to be loved, comforted, and understood. Thy will be done. I'm no longer running the show. And if I'll run that through my head before any human contact, I don't care what the human contact is, it'll go just fine. Thank you. Most useful, practical tool. And that was the only trick I used on Sharon. I didn't have an agenda. That following Christmas, 7 months later, Sharon and I were married. And I don't have problems with the opposite sex today, and you're looking at a fellow that hadn't been 24 hours without problems with the opposite sex since Betty Brame in the first grade. And I'm not saying that everything is absolutely hunky-dory with no bumps in the road with Sharon. I mean, certainly we're human beings. It's a human relationship. But as far as real problems with the opposite sex, don't have that anymore. The financial thing was a little slower. Did you ever try to turn something over to God with one hand while you were being systematically less than rigorously honest with the other? Well, it doesn't work very well. And the silliest idea that my brain had ever heard, and my brain still of the same opinion, is that I need to be as rigorously honest with the Internal Revenue as I need to be with you guys in my daily dealings. And had another meeting with Tom about a year or two after I'd been up there in May. He and I met in Columbus, Ohio, and had lunch, and I don't think the IRS was mentioned. I had no idea what the problem was. Don't remember what I thought the problem was when I went up there. Don't remember what Tom said. But on the way back, the magic had happened, and it occurred to me, you know, I'm standing up in these rooms and talking to these folks about rigorous honesty. Even though my brain tells me that in my special position, because I still had 6-figure tax liens on me from the old days and I had all these other problems, I never drew a breath without a federal tax lien on me from the time I was 25 years old until 1996. Never drew a single breath. Took me a year and a half after I became self-employed to get the tax liens, and they were there until 1996. So I went back to Louisville and I started just trying to treat the IRS with the same rigorous honesty that I need to treat you guys in my dealing. And my brain was screaming, that won't work, and this is really stupid, and nobody does this. And as bad off as your finances are, it's really going to get bad now. But I kept on doing it. With regard to the procrastination, I gave up on trying to fix my procrastination, but somehow in a conversation with my friend Billy Hogue from Louisville, it occurred to me, I can go to work at 8 o'clock. So I started doing that, nothing else. I just started whatever it was, regardless of whether I felt like it, regardless of whether there was any reason I needed to get in there. I just started going to work at 8 o'clock. Now, I can't tell you what the connection is between those two things, or those things, but I can tell you that by 1996, finally, the wreckage of my past was finally cleared away. Sharon and I have been able to build a beautiful home that we really don't owe much on. We've got, of all things, retirement accounts. We've got money in mutual funds. And all I did was quit trying to fix it and just start trying real hard to do that next right thing and quit trying to figure out the patterns. And that's the way it's worked for me. I'm sorry I took a little more time here, but I guess we can all work it out. But I really wanted to share that because I was excited when Patty mentioned this. Gosh, it was almost a year ago. Because 6 and 7 have been where I've lived for the last 8.5 years. 6 and 7 have been it for me. And for me, it's been a surrender. It's kind of hard for me to talk about because it really wasn't the beginning of action as much as it was the cessation of frantic activity, of stopping fighting, of trying real hard to do the next right thing and just letting my God lead me where he or she wanted me to go by doing the next right thing. And I want to tell you folks, it's worked beyond my wildest dreams. Thanks.
I'm Bill Pittman, alcoholic. Bob suggested that after lunch we'd be getting to the solution, so I think the three of us have close to 70 years in AA. And for me, the solution is something that's ahead of me. Everyone in this room is better than they were a week ago. Part of my job is talking to people who come, they're miserable in recovery, they're stuck. You don't make any progress in this program unless you get stuck occasionally. It's another plateau to move on to a better understanding of the steps and apply them to our recovery. One thing I've stopped doing is living my life in a rearview mirror. Some bad things happened to me. Bad things have happened to all of us. In the 90s, it's real easy to be a part of the victim generation. If we keep licking our victim wounds, we're not going to move very far ahead. I know some awful things have happened to some people in this room. I won't minimize those. But we can't move forward if we keep looking in a rearview mirror of the awful things that possibly happened to us or that we magnify on. There's another phrase Don was talking about, next right thing. In the 12 and 12, they use the term right size. When I'm out in the Northeast, they use that term a lot in meetings, trying to tell us to be humble and get down to our own right size. In the 7th step, we talk about humility, and for me, a simple definition would be we are as humble as we are grateful. It's hard sometimes to be grateful for me when a lot of life changes go on. Currently, all sorts of areas in my life are upside down. They're upside down because a lot of them are good and some of them aren't so good. I can't handle either one, so... and especially when 2 or 3 happen at once, it's real pretty confusing. I also remembered something about my childhood that in the 50s, not much, people had to walk a long way, and in Minnesota, you had to walk in big 10-foot snowdrifts, but it was a long way to school, but we were so poor we couldn't afford legs, so I had to crawl to school. So that's trying to get over that one too. So. There's a sentence on page 164 of the big book. The answers will come when our own house is in order. Why they ever put that in there, I don't know. That means we're supposed to go back to page 1 and start all over again. Because every day in recovery there's more answers. But we have to take the action to keep our house in order. And my two panelists here know that I'm running on low energy, so I am going to read a couple things. When we're working the 6 and 7 step, there's different components. We have to be aware of our spiritual values, perspective beyond our addiction to other addictions in our life, to the addictive nature of our lives. We have to ask through prayer. We have to be willing to receive through humility. We have to trust the process. We have to become aware and understand the process, take responsibility, and turn that into some positive action. The program of AA is suggestive. We aren't saints. We're supposed to make progress, but as alcoholics, we want to be perfect. Humility is our acceptance of ourselves. I don't know if I'll ever accept myself. I have trouble with that every day. Is it because we're alcoholics that we don't really know ourselves so well? Like Bob was saying, there's that part that's hidden. When I'm stuck, at least I've learned on most occasions to ask for help. I can't do it on my own. And the importance of a home group, going there every week and seeing people, you can't choose who's in your home group. You can choose who you go out to dinner with afterwards. And I think that's a very important distinction. And that's really where I get a lot of my help, is the dinner after a home group. I'd like to read a story a friend of mine wrote. I have learned from experience that staying abstinent and attending meetings through painful times is a guarantee of personality change. We no longer have to escape our pain through using. The program has given us a precious tool, humility, which, used regularly, will transform pain into growth. Armed with humility, we who once dreaded change are as much as death can learn to face real life with a new courage and hope. Before we entered the fellowship, we lived in a fantasy world of our own creation. We attempted to control not only effort but outcomes. We tried to keep ourselves calm with chemicals and food, with no recognition for the ups and downs of daily life. I was seeking an unreal world of complete security, romance, and approval, and the more I tried to control, demand these things, the more chaos I created. When I worked at AA headquarters, a day would not go by when we'd get 5 or 10 phone calls, people asking, what's the difference between shortcomings and character defects? As if that was the answer to step 6 and 7. The reason two different words were used, and this is in many history books, is that Bill Wilson did not want to repeat, authors do not like to repeat the same term. So they're both the same thing. And when we talk about staying right size, when I stay right size, I'm in direct proportion to my gratitude for the life I have in recovery. I'll turn it over to Bob.
Hi, Bob. I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to kind of run through a bunch of stuff, and then we're going to have kind of a summary and a question and answer period at the end. So I've got a few things we'll figure it out. Okay. As Don said, when we last left each other, we were in deep doo-doo. Kind of stuck at 8 years of sobriety. I was stuck in a dilemma that I was working hard to get rid of my defects of character, not making much progress, feeling as uncomfortable at 8 years of sobriety as I was when I came in. You got me well enough not to like myself. But not well enough to make the transformation, which is, real good. And we laugh about that, but you watch statistics, we lose an awful lot of members from 6, 7 years to 10, I think, and there are a lot of suicides in sobriety. It's not an easy period of time. The problem that I had is I knew that if I asked God for help, I thought I knew what God was going to ask me to do. He's going to ask me to get up in the morning, go to work, stay at work all day. He's going to ask me not to spend more money than I made, be loving and kind to my wife and children, stop gambling, and a few other things that I was doing. I thought I knew what God wanted, and I was, busting my britches to try to do that, and was not doing it successfully. So what's the sense of going to God and asking for help if you can't fulfill the conditions of the relationship? Pretty silly. So my idea was, as soon as I clean my act up, I'll go to God. And I was stuck in that place for almost 2 years, from about 6 years to 8 years. At 8 years, I was really in a lot of pain, and I went back to the steps. We're talking about step 6 and 7. You can't take step 6 and 7, I don't believe, unless you have the first 5 steps alive. You just have to have some sense of surrender. You have to have some sense of hope. You have to have some sense of really what you're dealing with, and make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, and through an inventory. And a 5th step, you have to have how that step changes our heart to present ourselves, I think, to be ready to take step 6 and 7. Going to step 6 and 7 in isolation is an intellectual exercise, and it is, it just isn't helpful. It isn't powerful enough. It isn't deep enough. It's more mechanical than it is spiritual. I went back at 8 years of sobriety, took step 1, and found out what powerlessness and unmanageability meant to me 8 years sober. It was not a difficult exercise. It was powerless and unmanageable. The surprise to me was step 2. I had to come to re-realize step 2 and I believe God would restore us, but not me. I'm 8 years sober. I'm going backwards. I'm on the down escalator running up. Every time I take a breath, I'm losing 3 steps. It's not working. I got as much way too much unmanageability. There's something broken in me. I got a built-in failure mechanism. I never finish anything. It ain't going to work. And I had to come to believe that God would restore Bob to sanity. I had to reclaim that at 8 years of sobriety. I took step 3 on my knee with my sponsor in his office. I'd not done that. It was effective for me. I did a 4th and 5th step. When I was done with the 5th step, I had done 2 previous 5th steps. My sponsor requested that I go see a psychologist. Most of you heard the story. I didn't want to. I went to psychologist. Psychologist wanted to get my wife involved. I didn't want my wife involved because wives look at things differently. They have a whole different data bank. It's real embarrassing, So it's then he got my kids involved, and it was it was a great experience. The most profound experience of which was the discovery of how much fear. If you would have asked me what my biggest problem was, I would have said anger. Anger was my response to fear. And fear permeated. Maybe in the last session I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think I'd like to go through this list just to kind of set it up, and then we'll go. After I went to psychologist, I went back, and I've done my 5th step. I'm working with a psychologist. I'm in touch with how afraid I am. I'm afraid of failure. So afraid that I don't try. I'm a salesman who doesn't make sales calls. I'm in a business that's going broke, and I'm working, 2-3 hours a day and playing backgammon 4 or 5 hours a day, and my life's, not good. And after just a horrible day, one day, just one of those days you just hate to have it videotaped and sent to the General Service Office. I was in my living room 11 o'clock at night reading some non-conference approved literature, and I was at my bottom. I was just clearly at my bottom, and I realized that I had tried as hard as I knew how to try. Maybe not perfectly, but I tried, and I failed at dealing with these defects of character, and all of a sudden I realized that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I was given the grace that night to take the 6th and the 7th step of AA. We don't change. A doctor doesn't heal. A doctor creates an aseptic environment, creates an atmosphere in which healing can take place and God heals. A farmer doesn't grow. He plants a seed, creates a fertile environment, an atmosphere in which growth can take place and God grows, and we don't change. We create an atmosphere in which change can take place, and I believe grace and God changes us. I think it's the attitude of the 6th and the 7th step and the 3 requirements of being honest, open-minded, and being willing. There is a power to truth. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, it was the first time in my life I stood naked in front of my alcoholism and told the truth about my drinking and my alcoholism. It changes you. Standing in front of the truth changes you. That night, I stood in front of the truth of my life at 8 years of sobriety, not just what I thought my alcoholism was. I stood in front of my sexuality, my marriage, my parenting, my finance, my life. No compartments, no alcoholism over here and sex over here and money up here and marriage down here. I stood in front of my life with no dividers. Up until that time, I felt like I was a guy who had 14 things to do, the ability to do 10, and I got 4 done. And it was, I got done. I took the 6th and 7th step of the program of AA, and that night 5 of the major problems of my life left. Such, I believe, is the power of God and the power of the program. When you're really ready to make a change, you put a support structure in place. Many of us have made promises about smoking and dieting and money spending and other sorts of things, and those resolutions often were not strong enough to maintain themselves over a period of time. Because my heart had been touched by the 6th and the 7th step, I turned the finances over to my wife. She manages money better than I did. We were in good shape in about 6 months. I started dating my wife. I've dated my wife every Friday night for the last 25 years, and I have her 23 years. When we're not on Friday, it's not another night. I spent thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours learning how to be a better parent. I stopped gambling that night. I made appointments with my sponsor about when I'd go to work and when I'd leave work. So I had a structure of support. My life took off like a rocket ship. The guy who couldn't work, and it also was the luck. I was in the right place at the right time, and the business started to make a lot of money. I had a very bright partner, which helps a lot. And we had an unparalleled process of success. What is the mystery? If we really inside of us have our hearts that want to be good people, if we want to be fully who we are, why can't we be? I mean, what is the problem? Well, there's a number of them. As I said, one of them is that we're afraid of change. And please don't underestimate that. If I had to state one thing that is the largest obstacle, would you close that door, please? If I had to state one thing that was the largest obstacle, it is our fear of change. And there's a guy by the name of Scott Peck, wrote a book, The Road Less Traveled, wrote another book, Further Along the Road Less Traveled. He wrote others too. And in the chapter, Road to Omaha, he talks about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of death and dying. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And, someone tells you got cancer, you deny it. Maybe it's not true. I'll get another opinion. Anger, why is this happening to me? Bargaining, please God, remove my cancer and I'll devote my life to you. Depression, when those 3 things don't go away, you get your nose pressed in the reality of cancer and death, and you go into depression. And if you make it through the depression, you get into acceptance. And he talks about if you allow depression to do its work, which I had not heard. And here I'm not talking about clinical depression, I'm talking about the depression created by a circumstance. And I take it to mean to grind the ego to dust. If our program is about surrender, as I believe it is, I think our strength is our weakness. You have to empty yourself out. You have to die to live. You have to, you have to make change. You have to be clearing for that change to take place. That clearing happens as the ego diminishes. It gets out of the way. When the ego's in charge, we are full. There is no space. There is no opening for change. There's no place for grace to operate, I don't believe. But he said, when we talk about those passages, we think that most people who die go through those 5 things. They don't. They go through the denial, anger, and bargaining. But when they get into the depression, the pain is too great, and they back up out of the depression into the anger, bargaining, and denial. And then he said a fascinating thing. He said, and it's interesting that in major changes of our life, we go through the same stages. We treat change like dying. Now the problem is we view behavior like it is part of us, like it is us. What we're trying to do is alter us. It ain't us. It is behavior. It is not skin and bones. It is not your soul. It is not your spirit. It is behavior. You can change behavior. It doesn't change who you are. You can change from Republican to a Democrat. You can be left-handed or right-handed. You can, go from golf to soccer. It doesn't change who you are. And most of us are literally looking at dying because we have to change something, some essential quality of who we be. And the other thing I want to say is we're not in this room discussing how to do steps 6 and 7. You get your heart in the right place, 6 and 7 will do you. It is not a matter of doing, it is a matter of shift of being. Doing comes out of being. What we're looking for is a change of spirit and heart. We're trying to connect. We're trying to restore our integrity. That is why recovery and the spiritual growth is not linear. It is not predictable. It is not when you change a person's heart, get out of the way, because you're looking at like a rocket ship taking off. You are not, and everybody who wants this conversation wants to know what to do. You don't have to do anything. If you take, and of course you do. I mean, you have to, you have to get dangerous. You have to go to meetings, have a sponsor, do the steps, read the book, but you can sit in a chicken house forever and you won't be a chicken. But it's a distinction about action and activity that Don was talking about. There comes a time in your sobriety where activity does not cut it. There are things that have to happen privately, personally. There are times in your behavior where you just have to stop doing what you're doing. The universe is talking to you. Most of us have lived our lives in an attempt to avoid pain. A spiritual traveler goes towards pain, goes through pain. It is illusionary. There is no pain in change. The pain is in resistance to change. If you go back and look at your life, there has never been a time when you have gone through and made a major change in your life that energy has not been produced in that process, far beyond the absence of the problem. There is always an anticipated, additional, wonderful thing that happens after you get the obstacle out of the way. We have like miniature black holes in our psyche with unfinished business, with amends that are not made, with business that is not transacted, with defects of character that weigh us. It's a wonder we get dressed in the morning. And we are afraid if we give up these treasures, which are really dog turds and gold tinfoil. They are not treasures. I promise you. But we perceive them to be. We clutch them to our bosoms like they are because we perceive them to be part of us. To give them up is like dying. Well, read any spiritual literature, and what is the passage? How do you get through the process? It is dying. It is surrendering. It is. Well, read any spiritual literature, and What is the passage? How do you get through the process? It is dying. It is surrendering. It is giving up the very things that you do not want to give up in order to have the experience, and what's on the other side is always more of you than what you left behind. The process of spiritual growth is a process of removal, not of addition. It is taking away the things that impede you, that have blocked you, that you have added that are unnecessary, and when you remove them, when you drop the rock, you are free. You are more yourself than you have ever been. The process of spiritual growth is a process of coming home. It is not a process of becoming someone else. It is becoming more truly who you are than you have ever been in your life. That's why it is energizing. That's why it is confirming. That's why it is always positive. There is never anything negative in it, because what you're removing is not of you. It is behavior. It is desire. It is attachments. It is nothing. And if you look back, what has happened to us is that we have had some spiritual awakening. Having been spiritually, so what has happened to us is we are now more awake. When you are more awake, rather than living our lives asleep, everybody in this room has been asleep to certain issues time and time again. But there comes a time when you are in the middle of your little routine and you look in your child's eyes and you see the fear. And at that moment, you're not asleep. The universe is speaking to you. Quit being an asshole. I mean, excuse my French, but I mean, it is, the universe is speaking to it. It isn't like, if God wanted to get a message to you, how would he get it to you? Bad news, probably your spouse. I mean, isn't that, who wants that message? Or your children, or your parents, or your co-worker, or your sponsor. How else would he get the message to you? We don't want the message, we don't want the messenger. We don't want to change, we don't want the information. But it is like we are afraid to become who we truly are. And I will tell you that there is nothing to be afraid of in the process of change, and we are more afraid of it than anything else, and it is the design of life. I'm going to stop there and we'll just go.
Just a second. I just got to say something with Bob having finished, and I didn't say this a few minutes ago, and I guess it's good that I shared it until now. This is one of these real goosebump things for me. One reason I was so overwhelmed when Patty first mentioned doing this, and that Bob would be involved, and found out later that Bill would be, is that one of the things that I left Cleveland with in May of 1990 was a tape that my sponsor gave me of a guy by the name of Bob B. from St. Paul. And it was on that tape that Bob was talking about 6 and 7. And I've told Bob this privately, and I want to tell him in front of the room, I believe that God used you as a channel to change my entire life. And I thank you, and I thank God.
Wow. Okay. Pardon me. Get all the composure here. If you've liked what you've heard so far, the 6 and 7-step workshop is being recorded courtesy of Gopher State Tape Library, a non-profit, all-volunteer corporation, and is done in the spirit of trying to carry the message. The tapes of the individual speakers will be available immediately following the conclusion, and the cost is $5 per tape, or a complete set for $15. So just to let you know that, we're coming up to our last section, so if you want to order, it might be easier than waiting to the end and inundating poor Dave over there. So we will take a 15-minute break now, and I'll welcome you back then.
I'm Bill, alcoholic. Let's start with the Serenity Prayer, please. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm very impressed with the fact that so many people have stayed in their seats these many hours and are listening to what are considered the two most unpopular steps. And give yourselves a lot of credit. Thank you. The fact that I will daily question my willingness to change will increase my ability to be increasingly willing. I thought I'd get that on the tape because it's a tough sentence, but if we're only in recovery because we're afraid of returning to the old way of life, we'll never pay attention and open our hearts to learn about the new. I never really needed a better family, partners, or friends. I needed to be a better person. I continually need to be a better person. By working steps 6 and 7, realizing that I'm not perfect, I don't need to be, I have to take the action for improvement. 8 years ago, I was living on the West Coast. A friend of mine named Bob B. wrote me a letter. As any good author, I plagiarized the letter and put it in a book. So, detailed investigations extended over many years now enable me to present concrete evidence that there is a worldwide conspiracy among countless individuals who point out to me my character defects. I continually uncover such plots and am becoming better at spotting them in my never-ending search to find others to blame. There's a story of a man in the flood. A man who believed in God devoutly lived by a river which flooded on occasion. One spring the rains fell very heavily and the river began to rise. Soon it was above the foundation of the man's house. A sheriff came by in a 4x4 truck, offered the man a lift and telling him it was time to evacuate the area. The man refused the ride, stating, "God will take care of me." The river continued to rise, and soon the man was forced up to the second floor of his house. Looking out his window, he saw a rescue boat approach. Opening the window, he shouted to them to go away. After they had offered to rescue him, he said, God will take care of me." The river continued to rise, and the man was forced out on the second floor onto the roof. When he climbed up to the chimney and held on, the river rose to where it was swirling around his legs and torso, threatening to tear him away from the rushing water. A helicopter came, swooping out of the darkening sky, and started to lower a rescue sling to lift the man out of jeopardy. He waved the chopper off, shouting, "God will take care of me." Very soon after the helicopter left, the man was swept off the roof into the raging flood and drowned. Upon arriving in heaven, he was greeted by St. Peter and taken before God. Before God could greet him to say hello or how do you do, the man angrily demanded to know why God had let him down. After all, he had great faith and trust in the Lord. God said to the man, "I sent a 4x4 truck, a boat, and a helicopter to help you. What more could I do?" All of us are like the man with a house by the river. We don't recognize the help that comes our way every day. 7-step prayer says my usefulness. I try to use that every day when my character defects are actively in full force. To the best of my ability. And I've been able, in the process, to change many of my character defects. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
I don't have much to add. I was just thinking on the self-determined objective part of it. I strongly recommend the 12 and 12 on step 6 and 7. It's a great augmentation to our 2 paragraphs in the big book. But by the way, many of you probably heard this, but Joe of Joe and Charlie has got an explanation for that. He says that steps 6 and 7 are the pick and shovel steps. He says if you go down to the hardware store and you buy a very complicated new tool, you'll get all sorts of instructions with it. But if you go to the hardware store and buy a pick and shovel, you won't get any instructions. You know, we were supposed to know what to do, and it's just a matter of doing it, and I believe that. But Bill starts out step 6 by saying that this is the step that separates the men from the boys. Now, for you ladies, I know Bill meant the adults from the children. And a little bit further on in the discussion of step 6, Bill tells us what it is about step 6 that separates the men from the boys. It says, so the difference between the boys and the men is the difference between striving for a self-determined objective and for the perfect objective which is of God. And see, that's what I did for 9 years. I had this self-determined objective, and it was really dangerous because I dressed it all up in spiritual clothes. I mean, really and truly, all arrogances are dangerous to me, very dangerous. But I believe that the most dangerous arrogance to me is spiritual arrogance. That assumption that the idea that I had of what I ought to be was necessarily, I just could not imagine that God would disagree with me in my well-thought-out plan for what I ought to be. But it was the willingness to let go of that. The willingness to say, Mom, Dad, I don't know where we are. I don't know how we got here. I don't know where we're going. I sure don't know how to get there. That caused all the miracles that I've talked about in the last 8.5 years to happen in my life. And I'd mentioned the simplicity of it, that I really think what's so baffling about 6 and 7 is that at their core they are so simple, and something that I didn't tell you that the guys in Cleveland told me that weekend in May of 1990 is that they told me, Don, you go back to Louisville, and any time you start thinking that any of this is any more complicated than you doing the next right thing instead of what you want to do, you call us because you're nuts again. And folks, that's what it's been for me. It's been just that simple. It's been letting go of the pattern of quit trying to play God and of trying to just do that next right thing, leaving the pattern up to God and taking the stitch. And again, it has worked so well, despite the fact that my own judgment of how I was doing has been so frequently that I was doing terribly. All that stumbling and falling and getting knocked off track and having to start over and over again. I've got a friend up in New York in the program that says that the single most important word in the 12 steps is in the 10th step, and that word is continued. And that's what it's been for me, folks, is just continuing to keep acting like a fellow would act if a fellow wasn't really all that concerned about being spiritual looking and comfortable, but just really wanted God to fit him to be of maximum usefulness to God and those around him, and didn't have any idea of what it took to fit him to be useful. And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Bob. I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to do just a quick little summary. What I'd like to do, and this is a question as much as it is, we're going to close today with the two things. We're going to have a little question and answer thing if you'd like. And we were going to close it with this 7-step prayer. And one of the things I would like to do is for us to do that together and say the 7-step prayer as we're seated here and just kind of walk ourselves through very briefly the first 5 steps. I think a lot of us have been through some of the attitudes and thinking today, and then we'll say that together, and then we can get up after the question and answer period and simply close with the Lord's Prayer. Would that be okay with you guys?
Great.
So what we've been talking today is struggling. There never has been a time, I don't think, in the program where we have more teaching about AA than we have today. And I think that is excellent. And I think that there are, but like any process, I think what happens is AA has always been kind of an oral tradition. And we have passed the experience of our hearts onto each other. And today we have more in writing, more in tapes, more in seminars and these sorts of things. There's a tendency for us all to sit down and try to learn what to do. And as I tried to say a few minutes ago, it is also about being. There's a mistake that a lot of us can make, that the steps are mechanical. That if I go through the process and do the formula, I'll be okay. If I, admit, if I, come to believe, if I, say the 3rd step prayer and I do a 4th and 5th step and 6th and 7th, and a lot of us have gone through the steps and we have sometimes not had the changes happen as a process of going through those steps. Because the process is spiritual, not mechanical, sometimes, if it was mechanical, every time we'd have a problem, all we'd have to do is say the 3rd step prayer and click our heels and we'd be back in Kansas. There literally would be no issue. But there are times when we go to say the 3rd step prayer and no one's home. It has to do with how we come to the process. And I really think that is one of the messages that we're saying today. One of the ways we come is humbly, and that with that is a type of honesty, with that is a type of vulnerability, with that is a type of openness that comes difficult to those of us with egos and those of us who breathe. It's a tough process, and so please understand that it isn't that we don't control the process, that we can go through and try to have every behavior that the steps say, and if we don't, if we somehow don't have our spirits in right condition, if we somehow don't have some experience of surrender in that process, I don't believe we will be able to have some of the changes. And I think that there are 2 ways the steps affect us. One is when we actually formally go through and take them, but I believe that they are principles that become part of the fabrics of our lives. That they literally become like a quilt that we wear as we travel about the business of our lives, and they participate in our very thinking and being all the time. And so there are, they just become part of us. So we discussed today, we're talking about problems. Problems create pain. Pain is the opportunity, and the pain is a message. The universe and God is trying to say something to us, and I think the message is it's not working. Okay, pain is where we're stuck. When you're on a journey, when you go forward, it looks like we're falling backwards and not, but actually when you progress, when you go forward in the journey, you run into what's in your way. Some of what's in Don's way is not in mine. Some of what's in my way is not in Don's, and we have some great similarities. And the same thing with Bill. We all leak. We don't leak in the same spot. The importance is not what you leak. It is only that you leak. One of the other great insights that I think we could all get in this room is one of the great comforts we had when we came to Alcoholics Anonymous is we discovered that we were not unique as alcoholics. One of the discoveries we have yet to make, and we need to make, is we are not unique as human beings. The problems we have with our children, with sex, with money, with marriage, with life, with work, are problems that we all have. We need to give ourselves permission to have the problems we have. As you go on in life, one of the things you have to develop too is compassion. And compassion for yourself. You will not be able to confront or stand in front of, in a vulnerable way, things that are problems in your life if you are not compassionate. If you are too judgmental about others, you will be judgmental about yourself. And you will not be able to, you just won't be able to admit that you're that bad, or you will struggle in that conflict. You will not resolve it. It's a circular conflict, and you have to develop a healthy, I think, self-love and be able to laugh at yourself a little bit and have the type of compassion, because you do have to tell the truth about what is going on before you can take care of it. So problem, pain, message, and tell the truth. When you tell the truth and you put a label on it, like we put on our alcoholism, you have the opportunity, I think, to have the most profound experience, which is the surrender, emptying out. And following the surrender immediately, I think, is an empowerment. And that's the process of our program. It is spiritual, not mechanical. It affects the way we be, not what we do. And in the big book, when we read that, our description of the alcoholic and our chapter to the agnostic and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas: that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, and that God could and would if he were sought. Some of what we do needs to be direct, personal seeking of God. Some of the reason we are blocked is we have a limited view of God. We have a limited view of our relationship with God. It was more typical 30 years ago that when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, almost everybody was older, married, in a religion, and had a job for a period of time. Today we are being flooded with people who don't have some of the structural supports that I think people had, that do not have the religious background and experiences, and we are coming into Alcoholics Anonymous more vulnerable and, in certain cases, a little less equipped. And there are some spiritual reading that we need to do that I think will bolster, as our book recommends, that I think will bolster some of that and enlarge our view. We need to have a view of ourselves as we relate to God. And it is a process, I say, of coming home. And the God of your understanding, I believe, as you go further on in this process, you will discover is your own personal God. It is not Don's God or Bill's God or Bob's God. It is your God. It is your personal experience of that God. It is not a fear that you be in conflict with it. I think at the bottom you will find that it is the very embodiment of who you are. That the special gift and expression that you are, when you get into the middle of that there'll be nothing missing, that you are whole and complete, and there are just things in the way. And this process of our steps is a way of removing those things and bringing us to wholeness and joy and happiness and peace in a way that we've not had it before. So in closing this part of the program, I want to say that all of us, I think, in coming together in this room, we've had a conversation with each other. You have permitted us. I think this has worked fairly well. And one of the reasons it works fairly well, it's a two-way communication. We would not have been able to have the talk that we've had today with another group. It was necessary that we had this consciousness in this room to be able to have this conversation. So we are in this room aware of our powerlessness and unmanageability. Okay? We believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to wholeness and sanity. We've made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And in the conversations today and in our hearts, we have been in touch with our defects of character. And in our conversation with God and ourselves today, we have admitted those. And the circumstances are not appropriate for us to share that with one another, but I think our hearts are in the right position. And with that in mind, I would, all of us to take the sixth step and say that we're entirely ready to have God remove our defects of character. And on page 76 of our book, or it's on the bottom of the sheets of paper that they handed out, I would ask Don to lead us in that we all would recite the 7-step prayer.
My Creator,
I am now
willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen.
We can do a few questions and answers if anybody has. There's a mic in the middle of the floor. Is that something that we want to do? Maybe we do that for a half hour, 20 minutes?
We need to use this one.
Is that unnecessary, that it kind of take the edge off that, or just leave it the way it is? Who wants questions? Who wants it to stop right now, just the way it is? Why don't we stand up and say the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation,